Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going way back. Like, way back. We're talking Genesis 10, the Table of Nations.
Oh yeah, Genesis 10. It's one of those parts of the Bible that can seem, well, a little dry at first glance.
Exactly. A table. Not exactly a page-turner, right? But trust me on this, it's way more interesting than it sounds.
It's like a historical mystery novel hidden in plain sight.
I like that. So, we've got this list of Noah's descendants after the flood. But it's more than just names on a family tree, right?
Right. It's like a giant jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
And the pieces, they're ancient empires, migrations, lost languages. It's fascinating.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So we start with Noah's sons, the famous three, Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Yep. And each one of those sons, they become the ancestors of different nations. It's like this incredible spreading out, this branching family tree of civilization.
Okay, so where do we even begin with this family tree? It's massive.
Well, let's start with Ham. His descendants, they spread out across Africa and into the Levant. We're talking Cush, often linked to ancient Nubia. And then there's Mizraim, closely tied to Egypt.
Hold on, Egypt. Like the Egypt. Pyramids and pharaohs. Egypt.
That's the one. And then we have Canaan, which we know was a major player in biblical history.
Wait, it actually mentions Canaan. Not just the Canaanites, but like the place.
Oh, yeah. Genesis 10 gets specific. It lists out the different groups living there, like the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgashites. It even lays out their borders. It's like having an ancient map hidden in the text.
Wow, that is seriously specific. It's like Genesis 10 isn't just telling a story, it's giving us coordinates. Okay, so what about the other sons? Where do Japheth's descendants end up?
Think Mediterranean Sea, maybe even venturing as far as Europe. We've got names like Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan. Some scholars even think Javan might be connected to the ancient Greeks.
No way, really? That's wild.
It is. And we see Tubal, Meshech, Tyrus. It paints this picture of incredible journeys, people spreading out and settling across vast distances.
So we're talking about the very foundation of civilizations here.
Exactly. This is the bedrock.
Wow.
But we can't forget Shem. His line is particularly important because it leads to Abraham, the patriarch of the Israelites.
We're talking about a lineage that's at the heart of Judaism, Christianity, even Islam. What does Genesis 10 tell us about Shem's descendants?
Well, it connects the Israelites with other major groups. We encounter the Elamites. They had this ancient kingdom in what we now call Iran. And then there are the Assyrians with their powerful empire that dominated the ancient Near East.
It's amazing how these names we see in history books, they come alive in this chapter of Genesis. It's like seeing them with new eyes.
It really is. And there's one more descendant of Cush we should definitely talk about, Nimrod.
Oh, yes, Nimrod, the mighty hunter, right. What's his story? He's always seemed like this larger-than-life figure.
He really is. Nimrod's described as a powerful ruler, the one who established a kingdom that included Babel, Erech, Akkad.
Wait a minute, those names sound familiar. Weren't those major cities in Mesopotamia?
They were. Key centers of power, innovation, the whole nine yards. And then Nimrod heads over to Assyria and establishes Nineveh, along with Rehoboth, Calah, and Rezimah.
We're talking about a king who got things done. But what's with that mighty hunter before Yahweh title? That's always been a bit of a head-scratcher.
It's a detail that's puzzled scholars for ages, honestly. Some think it refers to him literally hunting wild animals, showing his strength and dominance over nature. Others interpret it more metaphorically, like he was a conqueror, hunting down enemies and expanding his territory.
So, literal hunting, symbolic of his power, or maybe even both. It definitely adds another layer to his story. Okay, but speaking of stories, let's go back to Ham's son Mizraim for a second. You mentioned his connection to Egypt, but there are all these other descendants listed.
Yeah.
The Ludim, Anamim, Leabim. These names are a mouthful. I know, right? It's like a whole ancient language just trying to pronounce them all. So who were these groups? Any clues about where they ended up?
Some are still a mystery, even to scholars. But we do have some interesting connections, like the Casluhim. They're mentioned as ancestors of the Philistines.
Wait, seriously? The Philistines, the ones always battling it out with the Israelites.
The one and only. It's amazing, right? Genesis 10 is suggesting this shared ancestry between groups who, at least in the popular imagination, are like sworn enemies.
It's like finding out your arch nemesis is actually your third cousin twice removed or something. Wild. Genesis 10 definitely knows how to keep things interesting. Okay, so to recap, we've got Ham's descendants spreading down through Africa into the Levant. Then there's Japheth. His family seems to head towards Europe. And we've started to trace Shem's line, which eventually leads to Abraham and the Israelites. What other surprises are hiding in Shem's branch of this family tree?
Well, Genesis 10 goes into some detail about Shem's sons, Elam, Ashur, Arpachshad, Lud, Aram. They're all in there.
It's like a who's who of ancient history. Which ones have the most interesting stories, would you say?
Oh, there's so many. Elam, for example. They were this ancient civilization located in what's now southwestern Iran. Fascinating culture, a history spanning centuries.
Yeah, this is what I love about this deep dive. It's like a crash course in ancient geography and history, all rolled into one. But it's more than that, right? It's about making these connections. The Elamites, the Assyrians, they're not just names in a history book anymore. Genesis is showing us how their stories intertwine with the Israelites, even if it's way back in their shared past.
Exactly. It's about seeing those ancient connections, the threads that bind us together across time and geography. And we can't forget about Arpachshad. Remember how we're tracing the lineage back to Abraham? Arpachshad is a key player in that story.
It's like we're following this thread through history, generation by generation. So where does Arpachshad fit in?
Well, he has a son named Shelah, and Shelah, he becomes the father of Eber.
Eber. Now that name rings a bell. Isn't that where we get the term Hebrew?
You got it. It's this amazing linguistic link. It connects the Hebrew people back to this specific ancestor, highlighting just how important this lineage is. Not just in a biological sense, but culturally too.
Right, like the very name Eber became this powerful symbol for the Hebrew people, a symbol of their heritage, their shared history. Okay, so Eber had a son, Peleg, and Genesis mentions something about the earth being divided during his lifetime. That's always intrigued me.
Yeah, the whole earth being divided thing with Peleg, that's a real head-scratcher that scholars have been debating for centuries, literally.
I bet. So what are some of the theories? What do people think this division actually refers to?
Well, some scholars believe it's talking about linguistic division. They connect it to that Tower of Babel story where languages get all mixed up.
Oh, right, that story. So instead of continents physically splitting apart, it's more about this breakdown in communication, a splintering of human language and culture.
Precisely. Now, others, they take a more geographical approach, speculating about land bridges disappearing, continents drifting. But that doesn't quite line up with our understanding of geology today, so it's not as popular a theory.
It's fascinating how one little phrase in Genesis can spark so much debate, so many different interpretations. It really makes you think. But hey, we can't forget about Peleg's brother, Joktan. He had a whole bunch of sons himself.
He sure did. 13, to be exact. And while we won't list them all, their names offer some interesting hints. Almadad, Shalef, Hazarmaveth. They have a distinctly Arabian sound to them, wouldn't you say?
Now that you mention it, they do. So are we talking about the Arabian Peninsula as a potential settling ground for Joktan's descendants?
It's definitely a possibility. The text mentions their territories stretching from Mesha towards Sephar, the mountain of the east. Scholars believe Mesha was likely located in northern Arabia, while Sephar is often linked to a mountainous region in southern Arabia.
Wow, the Arabian Peninsula. A region steeped in history, known for its strategic location, its role in trade, and of course, as the birthplace of major world religions. It really makes you wonder what part Joktan's descendants might have played in shaping the history of that region.
It's a question that's kept historians and archaeologists busy for a very long time. And it just goes to show how Genesis 10, even though it's focused on genealogy, on names and lineages, it also gives us these glimpses into the movements of people, the spread of cultures across vast distances.
You know, it's one thing to read about ancient empires and civilizations in history books, but it hits different when you see them through this lens, this family tree of humanity.
It's a whole new perspective, isn't it? Suddenly you're seeing the connections, the shared roots. It's not just about isolated civilizations anymore.
Right. We tend to think of ancient history as these separate boxes, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Israelites. But this chapter, Genesis 10, it reminds us that they all have these common threads, these ancestral links that tie their stories together.
It challenges us to look beyond those neat little boxes, doesn't it? To see the bigger picture, the web of human interconnectedness that stretches back through time.
It really does. You know, this deep dive has really sparked something in me. I'm ready to hit the history books, see these ancient civilizations with fresh eyes.
I have a feeling you'll uncover some fascinating things along the way. Remember, every name, every lineage mentioned in Genesis 10, it's a thread that leads to a larger story.
It's like we've been given this ancient treasure map, and now it's our job to follow the clues and see where they lead. So, to everyone listening, consider this your invitation to join the quest. Crack open Genesis 10, and don't just read the words. Imagine the journeys, the encounters, the conflicts, the cultural exchanges that unfolded over generations. Expert speaker, Thank you so much for being our guide on this incredible journey through the Table of Nations. You've given us a whole new perspective on the ancient world and on humanity itself.
The pleasure was all mine. Remember, the pursuit of knowledge never ends. Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep diving deep.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into Genesis 10. We hope this has inspired you to look at history with fresh eyes and to see the connections that bind us all together. Until next time, keep exploring the depths of knowledge.